That's when he called me up, because I think that gave him the idea that I was going to be doing something slightly different and wanted to move forward. And that's what he needed. He needed someone who he knew, I think, and someone who was thinking the same way as him. Because, you couldn't go out there and reproduce the Beatles or the Moody Blues in my case. You couldn't go out there and do the same stuff, with a different bunch of people. So he definitely wanted to be, shall we say, progressive and do something new.
Hey everybody, welcome to Primo NUTMEG. I'm your host, Steve. On this week's show, my guest is another Rock and Roll Hall of Famer. Today we have the one and only Denny Laine. He was a founding member of both the Moody Blues and Wings. In 1975, Wings won the Grammy Award for Band on the Run, the single and the title track from the 1974 album. In April of this past year, Denny was honored with the induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a founding member of the Moody Blues. Today, Denny Laine and the Moody Wing Band travel across the United States performing classic Wings and Moody Blues hits. And on January 10th, they will be performing at the Kate in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. Folks, if you enjoy this interview, please do like, share, and subscribe. Also, check out more of my interviews with other music legends, including Donovan, Jeff Pilson, Martin Barr, Jim McCarty, Fido Della Parra, and Steve Fossen. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and now here's my interview with Denny Laine. Denny Laine, welcome to Primo NUTMEG.
Hello, everybody.
So I definitely appreciate you being on the show today. It's an honor to have you on. I've had some Rock and Roll Hall of Famers on the show before, but I've never had a music legend who co-founded two great bands, the Moody Blues and Wings, so it's really an honor to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you. I mean, I feel very humble in this situation. I had two great bands, but you've got to remember that we were all kids at the time. It didn't feel such a big thing at the time. But looking back on it, I suppose you're right. It was pretty big.
So walk us through those early years. I mean, I know that you had a couple of small-time bands, I guess you'd say, in Birmingham when you were starting out. How did the Moody Blues first form? How did you meet the other band members? And what was it like in the band those first couple of years?
The thing was that two of the guys, Ray and Mike, had been out in Germany. At the same time, I think the Beatles were out there, because there's a lot of work out there because of the American Forces Network in Germany. And we used to listen to their radio show, Radio Luxembourg. So they came back from Germany looking to put a band together to go back to Germany. I had my own band, which is called The Diplomat. And Bevan from ELO later he went with, it was my drummer at the time. So, we had this pretty big band in Birmingham, but none of them wanted to turn professional or go to London, where I thought you had to be to make it, to get any kind of record label to be interested in you. So they didn't want to do that. And when the Moodies came to me, or when they came to me and asked me to get it together, I said, well, I want to play blues music. I don't want to play pop music. I'm not sort of, in that kind of bag. I'm more sort of into jazz, blues, and stuff like that. R&B, I suppose, as well. So anyway, we did, for about a year, we did have a residency, and then we got discovered and taken down to London. So my plan worked out. But anyway, it was a great little band because we just stuck to sort of the roots of blues music, and we got a following. And of course, at those days when the Beatles had been signed and the Stones had been signed, people were looking around the country for other acts to sign, and they came up to Birmingham, saw us, and then that was it. We went down to London and started our career there, you see.
And, of course, it was your idea to cover the song Go Now, which really helped launch the Moody Blues into international fame. What was it like when that song finally did break out and you found yourself famous?
Well, it was a long time coming. So people don't realise that we were together at least a year before we even went to London. And we'd been in bands for years anyway, all of us individually. So obviously it was a great achievement. I mean, partly thanks to our management at the time, because they were, they were pretty established businessmen, and they knew what they were doing as far as marketing, and it got us onto the Chuck Berry tour. which is a Robert Stigwood, he managed the Bee Gees. It was a Robert Stigwood production. And of course, being on the Chuck Berry tour, we got a lot of exposure. People would go out and buy the record. So the record went to number one. But it wasn't necessarily just my idea to pick that song. What happened was somebody went to America, came back with a suitcase full of 45s, and we all sort of gravitated to that song because Mike Pinder played piano. We actually played piano on stage, which was always a nightmare because half the pianos wouldn't be in tune, so we'd have to wait till they were tuned before we could start our set. And so he went on to Mellotron after that because of that reason. But yeah, we played piano, and that was an obvious song because of the piano intro. And that was it, really. So we kind of added that to our set, but our set was very similar to that kind of stuff anyway. Gospel, blues type of music,
So you, of course, were with the band for a couple of years there, and then in October of '66, you decided to leave. What was behind that decision?
Well, it's the various, at that time, I suppose because Mike and myself were writing, Mike Pinder and me, were writing a lot of stuff, experimenting, progressive more, than just being a band that did everybody else's kind of music. We were writing our own, influenced by the Beatles, I suppose, who were at that time good friends of ours, because we did do the Beatles' second tour in England. And we went with Brian Epstein because of that. And then I decided to leave because we owed Decca another album. We should have gone in the studio to follow up on our first one. And the guys didn't want to do it because basically what happened was we all got ripped off financially, and they wanted to stay on the road and just work and earn money. So I said, I'm going to go off and do some writing then. And we kind of drifted apart that way, and they went off and did a few shows, I think, in Europe. Got Justin and John Lodge involved, and that was that. I mean, that was really it. It was a very amicable thing, but I wanted to actually just go out there and do something different, so I did, and I put a string band together, and I decided to do that, for about a year.
I would be interested to know, though, what are your thoughts on the creative direction that the Moodies took after you left?
Again, there was also, first of all, there was also that thing of the Moodies being, established as a band with a style. I mean, we definitely, Donovan wrote on the back of our first album, he said the progressive blues band, which we were. And we had this kind of style of, because we had piano and we had Ray Thomas play harmonica and eventually flute. We had 5 guys that were all, 4 guys for sure, that were all singers. So we had a big harmony thing going anyway. So, Nights in White Satin was, in a sense, it was a great song. I love the song, and I love Justin's voice. But it was really very similar to the kind of music we were doing anyway, you see. He was obviously influenced by the Moody sound, and that's what happened with that record. The arrangements were what we were known for. So in other words, I don't think they went in that much of a different direction. It was just a progression of what we were already doing. And as I say, they needed a great songwriter, and they got one. So there you go. And of course, getting John Lodge in was a great idea because he was the original choice for the Moodies, In actual fact, when Clint Warwick left, the original bass player that I loved, he made the feel of that band. He's a very good player, good inventor, made his own parts up, You didn't have to tell Clint anything. And as soon as he left, it wasn't the same band anymore. So that would be another reason that I left. I just didn't feel it was the same band anymore.
So you mentioned that you had toured with the Beatles. Do you remember when you first met them, and did you get along with them from the start?
I always thought the Beatles were a great band because, being in Germany all that time that they were playing, every night for hours on end, it gets you tight, gets you very... And like the Moodies were the same, we were like a unit. We all came from the same town. We all grew up after the war. We all were influenced by the same music. So obviously the Beatles' music was very, much like ours in some ways, except that they came from Liverpool, we came from Birmingham. But I first met them in Birmingham. They were on a show, and I opened for them. or we opened them, the Diplomats opened for them. And they came round on the revolving stage as we went off. And I remember all the speaker leads flew out because no, somebody forgot to take them out and plug them back in again. That's what you have to do at a revolving stage. So they started off without any vocals whatsoever. I remember John pointing at the microphone saying, "What's going on?" So anyway, in the dressing room, I always remember piles of autograph books, sitting there. And it was their first, I think, tour, really. It was just after Love Me Do. So anyway, that's how I first met them. And then about a year later or so, when we went to London, we met up with them in a club in London called the Ad Lib Club. And from then on, we became friends, really. And then that's how they invited us on the tour with them. And that was the way it was. They used to come by our place and play them all their. They'd play all their acetates. If they'd just been in the studio, they'd come by and they'd play us the songs and ask us what we thought. So it was a little bit like that. We were all kind of friendly. We had parties. We went out to see other bands together, especially American bands that came to England. Paul and I would go out quite a lot. Me and John. And George Harrison lived down the road from us, so I was always over at his house.
I would just have to imagine that, being two bands touring together, there has to be a certain degree of competition as well, no?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, the whole thing about those days was we all admired each other. We all played on the same kind of gigs even before we got any fame. And we all tried to blow each other off the stage. It was always the way it was. Eric Clapton said to me once, he came off from the Yardbirds. We were on the same show as him. We used to do the Marquee Club. It was like a blues club in London. He said, "Beat that." I said, "Okay." So it was like that kind of friendly competition. But we went out of our way to try and be different, you see. That was the whole point. You didn't want to try and copy each other too much. Although you were influenced by each other, you can't help that. A lot of bands were very similar. But at the same time, you made a point of trying to be slightly different, in your look, in the style of music, or try to write your own material. That was the key. If you wrote your own material, you automatically became different. So yeah, it was friendly competition. But as I say, the clubs in London, we all would go there after gigs, and we'd all end up being there till 5 a.m, having a laugh and a drink and just chatting, talking about music. That's what it was like. It was very much like that in London at the time.
Were you surprised when the Beatles broke up, or did you kind of see that coming?
I wasn't surprised, but I was a bit disappointed because they had that opportunity of being very progressive. It's like they had open-ended studio time. They had the freedom to do what they wanted to do in the studio, which none of us had prior to that. Mm. You'd go in and you'd do a record. 3 hours later, you'd be out. So, they had that thing of being able to do that. And so they could experiment, they could write, they could try different... I went to one Sgt. Pepper album song, it was Fool on the Hill. And I saw the way they were working with trying all different things, which we never had a chance to do, really. So they threw out a lot of the ideas that they'd come up with, and then they'd end up with whatever they ended up with. But generally speaking, they were experimenting in the studio. So, after that, they were coming out with great albums because of that. Rubber Soul, Revolver, of course, Sgt. Pepper. It was a very progressive thing, and I always loved that about the Beatles. And the fact that they wrote all their own stuff eventually was a great influence, So obviously, I was like everybody else. I was disappointed that they stopped. But at the same time, they got so famous. And we can vouch for that because we were on tour with them. They got so famous that they couldn't go anywhere. They didn't have a life of their own outside the Beatles. And it was always like, they stick together and always working together. But once they don't have a life outside of that. And I think once they got to that point of being so famous, they wanted a bit more of a life, away from all of that. So they retreated to the studio and then eventually went off and did all their own thing. And then, of course, management and all those complications crept in. And that will break any band up, And so at that level, it was the intensity of it, I think, forced them apart, to be honest. But they're still great friends, even then they were fighting the courts. They're still all very close. Most bands are,
When you talk about that progressive music writing, I find it very interesting because when you hear these songs that change so much and develop so much, for example, one of my favorite McCartney songs that actually got identified with Wings, I think retrospectively, was Admiral Halsey, Uncle Albert. You know, when I hear that song and how it moves around and how different things happen within that song, I mean, just could you speak to how a band writes something like that? Do they work on one section at a time? Do you have a vision for what you're trying to do?
Yeah, it's interesting that you should mention that because, well, before I answer that, I would say that I had the song going Band on Their Own, which is no words, and it was 2 songs. So 2 completely different pieces joined together. That was Paul's idea. He said, why don't we just put these 2 pieces together and make a song out of it, which is what we did. So that, in some ways, is how I think, we write. I think what you do is you write the verse. You usually write the chords and the tune together. Not necessarily all the lyric, but some of it, an idea. And then you'd get to, after doing 2 verses of that, you think, well, we've got to put a bridge in here. So you write the bridge and you join it all together that way. I mean, obviously, after that, everybody did it on computers and sequencers, and they would just join things together to see what it sounds like,
Right.
And therefore, a lot of that, shall we say, concept album style came from that, just wanting to sort of join things together, segueing songs into songs, things like that. And the Beatles are obviously very famous, especially Sgt. Pepper, because it was meant to be a show like that, where you go from one person to another person to a song, and you would have different key changes, different tempos, things like that. And obviously the Beatles sort of developed that a lot. So did the Moody Blues, and especially after me. I remember Justin joining a couple of pieces together, and that would be one song. There's like fast section, slow section. So, I mean, a lot of people were doing that at the time. It just so happened that the Beatles are kind of synonymous with it. And in Paul's case, he's always kind of done that. He's always wanted to do something a little bit inventive, I suppose is the word, rather than just the normal. I mean, he's good at writing just simple songs as well. But when it comes to, telling a story, you want to try, especially with concept albums, like I said before, you want to try and go through all different moods, in different songs, and even in one song, you want to change it around as much as you can, and it keeps the audience there, interested, really.
So when and how did Paul approach you about forming a new band?
Well, like I say, I knew Paul really well. I hadn't met Linda at that time. So I knew Paul very well, right from the early days. And so, therefore, and he always used to stand at the side of the stage when we were on as well. He'd be checking it out. And he tried to get us to do one of the songs he I think, gotten hold of, which was Those Were the Days, and he ended up doing it with Mary Hopkins. But he said, this would be a good song for you, and we went, no. Although he hadn't written it, it was one of those, I think, public domain songs that he suggested. So, the fact is, he was, well, just give me the question again so I can sort of think about it a bit more. I went off at the tangent there.
I'm just wondering maybe what his, how he phrased it when he first approached you about joining a band.
Well, it wasn't really, again, it was just, hey, how you doing? Great. What are you up to? He didn't say that he'd been to see me with Jimi Hendrix a few months before. He just said, fancy putting a band together? I said, well, that's a surprise. What's going on? He said, well, great, get on a plane, come to Scotland. We're thinking about putting a band together. I said, great. So I did. But then I found out, of course, what I didn't. I found out after the fact. When we played my band, the Electric String Band, did the Jimi Hendrix show at Savile Theatre in London, which was owned by Brian Epstein, by the way. So I did that show, and it was all very, I was more involved with doing my gig than who was in the audience. But it turned out that Paul, John, and Peter Asher were all in the audience that night. I think I went down really well because I was doing something different. I had like 2 cellos, 2 violins, and and a trio. And even Jimi Hendrix paid me a compliment because I was doing something slightly different. Although the Beatles had done a lot of that on record with George Martin, I was actually doing that stuff on stage. Anyway, a few months later, that's when he called me up, because I think that gave him the idea that I was going to be doing something slightly different and wanted to move forward. And that's what he needed. He needed someone who he knew, I think, and someone who was thinking the same way as him, because you couldn't go out there and reproduce the Beatles or the Moody Blues in my case. You couldn't go out there and do the same stuff, with a different bunch of people. So he definitely wanted to be, shall we say, progressive and do something new, and that's really why I think he called me. So it was just, I was in the office one day and I was talking with Mark Bolan, who was a friend of mine, and I went in the back room. I had a little sort of suite at the back of the office, and the phone rang, and it was Paul. So I said, and by the way, my guys were all on tour with an orchestra at the time, the string players. So I was off the road at the time. So he said, "You fancy putting that together?" I said, I'm on the next plane. So I did. I went up there. It was very easy because we were up in the middle of Scotland, in the middle of the fields, and no press, no public really. And we just sat down and jammed on all the music that we were brought up on. So it came together really easily.
So Wings' first album was Wildlife. I would just be interested to know, what are your thoughts overall on that first album?
Well, again, I haven't listened to that album for years until recently. And when I listen to it, I can sense the freedom and the, shall we say, just a band playing together. We were at very early stages, and it was an experiment to go into, to the studio and try and put something down that we'd already been playing around with. Some of those songs are kind of not even lyrically finished at the time. So kind of a lot of it was made up. Everybody just played what they felt like playing. And it was our first recording. So although we'd sort of practiced, and done things, we hadn't actually been in a studio as such. So that was that. And that rawness, I think, is what I kind of like about it, listening to it now. It's the rawness. Of course, after that, we went and did, with a proper recording, producer, Glyn Johns, we did Red Rose Speedway, which was the other end of the stick. We went in with that attitude to make a double album. But a full production sort of album. But Wildlife was just what it was. It was a very just us practicing, something and going in and making it all up as we went along. Because we had Henry and he was new to the band, so it was just that. It was us with it, as we were, like any band. When you first start, you're never that polished. You just kind of start, That's what I'm saying. You don't really want to be in the public eye too much and be criticized when you're starting something new, So we wanted that time to just grow, and that was our way of doing it. But of course, we went in the studio with the idea of seeing how it worked, So that's what came out.
So then, following Red Rose Speedway, Wings made a big splash by writing the song for the James Bond film Live and Let Die, Roger Moore's first Bond flick. So I just would be interested, what was that like, writing that song? Were you familiar with the James Bond series before that? And what was it like having a song associated with a major motion picture?
Well, obviously we were all very involved with the James Bond stories. I mean, in England, he was like the hero. I mean, everybody... I actually met Sean, and it's these are big icons, these kind of actors. We loved the James Bond themes. We're all kind of Brits are all a bit like that, very gung ho. They love all those sort of spy movies. Yeah, and Paul was offered the job. Obviously, I didn't write it. I actually played bass on the session, but it was a live recording. It was done live with George Martin's orchestra. And in the big studio there, Air Studios, and it was, easy, really. I mean, we had it all worked out. We knew the parts. We went in there, the orchestra started playing, and we recorded it. It was very easy. But the fact that it was kind of trendy at the time. You know, Tom Jones did one, Lulu did one, Shirley Bassey did one. It was kind of trendy to have a name doing a James Bond theme, you know. But in this case, of course, Paul wrote it, as opposed to the other people. And that's it. Once you're given the title, it's like anything else. If somebody said to me, can you write a song about, you know, that chair over there? I'll say, okay. They give you the idea, and it inspires you to write. So that's kind of easier than making it up yourself. And then, well, as I say, all I did was play bass on it and sang a couple of harmonies, so it wasn't really me, but...
Well, nevertheless, I did just have one last question on that song, because Guns N' Roses, of course, years later covered that.
I loved their version. I loved that.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you. I didn't know if maybe you liked it or not. But I
guess I did. I thought it was great. I thought the fact that the band like that took that song and turned it into their own song in a way. You know what I mean? They did it as a rock band. I mean, actually, I do it on stage sometimes myself, and I just do it as a band without all the bells and whistles and all the pyrotechnics. You know, I just kind of, it still works in a sense. But as I say, they did a great version of it, because they were all good musicians, you know, anyway, and they had their own thing, their own sound. I always liked that with bands, and I think they did a great job.
So that same year, 1973, you folks also released the album Band on the Run. And I think, you know, that's really the album people might most associate with Wings. What are your thoughts on that album? And of course, you know, the single Band on the Run, as well as the big single Jet. You
know, I'm actually going on tour, and I'm doing that album because I'm doing that album and the Magnificent Moodies album as a show. But I mean, not a tribute band version, but you know, more modern, sort of up to date, long solos. Just extension of those songs. But it's because of my association with Band on the Run, the album, and Paul. The fact that just the two of us put the music together, with Linda adding a few harmonies. But it was definitely going to be a band album originally. And then they didn't turn up, the other two guys. And then the rehearsal tapes were stolen off Paul when he got robbed in Lagos. And so we had to start again, and it was just me and him really putting it down, you know, drums and guitar to start with. So my association with that is very personal, more than the other albums, I would say. Now, because of that, I think him playing drums gave it a certain feel, simplicity. You know, we were under great pressure to do it because, hey, we booked studio time, we were there. And we had Jeff Emerick with us, who was like the Beatles, Wings engineer anyway for many years. So we made the best of what the circumstances were, and came out with a great album. Now, I wouldn't have thought that it was going to be any more popular than any other album, but when I look back at it, I think, well, it's because of the feel of it, something about it. You know, each album has a feel, and it's something to do with that I think made it most popular one, if you like. You know, again, Band on the Run is what you said before. It's pieces of songs put together to tell a story. You know, it starts off slow, then goes to a sort of you know, shuffle rock thing, and then it goes into like the open, you know, acoustic big thing with slide guitars and something. It's like 3 songs.
It's true.
You know, yeah. And Jet was again written about one of the horses up there in Scotland. It's like, you know, you get inspired by whatever your background, where you are at the time, you get inspired. And that song was written then, influenced by one of the horses, Jet with the wind in your hair and 1,000 laces, you know. It's like riding a horse. But, you know, when you take it to the band, then the band gives it that special whatever. But in our case, it was us, and then we added all the rest to it. So that made it sound like a big band, but at the beginning, it was just me and Paul putting it down.
And what I think a lot of people don't know is that was recorded in Nigeria. Why did you folks decide to record it there?
We always had this thing of wherever you are, you're going to be influenced by the music. See, so for example, me and Paul would go to Spain, say for a week. We'd sit there and just be influenced, or Morocco, or somewhere like that, and then we would just write or be influenced by that environment or the music, basically, the style of the folk music. Same with Lagos. We always loved that, African drums. It's the same with reggae. We loved reggae too, so we would go there. But Lagos was just another EMI Studios, which we picked out from a map, So, and it was an EMI project, so that's what we had to do. So we went there, partly because Ginger Baker had a studio there as well, or he's a friend of ours. We didn't actually use his studio, except once we went over there to put some percussion on one of the songs. But anyway, it was a studio that was EMI studio, and we used it because of that reason, and we were influenced by a lot of the music out there, even though he wouldn't know that from the album. It's just being in that atmosphere that influences you, really. It's not like taking their music and using it. It's just being around that atmosphere that gives you a certain relaxation, I suppose, or whatever. It puts you in a certain mood, and that's what we came away with.
Well, after that, Wings released your fourth album, Venus and Mars. What are your thoughts on that album?
Same thing. We went to New Orleans to do that, and again, I was very much influenced by New Orleans music. Professor Longhair and the Meters and Alan Toussaint and all those people were our influences, and we went there because of that. So we ended up with a New Orleans influenced album. But at the same time, we got hold of Joe English, a brass trombone player, Tony. He found Joe English for us, and he became our drummer on that album from meeting him in New Orleans, actually. So again, we just hung out with all those musicians down there. That Zydeco style of, the Neville Brothers and all those people were all great influences. We love that kind of music. So wherever we love the music is where we would go, and that was another example of that. So again, it turned out to be, a completely different style of album. I should say that about all Wings albums. They're all different.
That's
because
true.
of that reason, yeah.
Well, your next album after that, Wings at the Speed of Sound, that was really at the height of your popularity and success, and Silly Love Songs off of that album was a huge commercial success.
Well, obviously, it's taken a while to get to that point. That was like, we had a band that was more or less established more, We'd done more as a band. And now we had an opportunity for everybody to have a sing. Paul was always trying to get us to be a little bit more up front, as individuals, so that we could all, like, for example, I had a couple of songs on there, and I also had Joe English sang one, Jimmy, Linda. It was because of the fact that we wanted to push everybody out to the front a little bit more, instead of it just being Paul McCartney and Wings. And it was Paul's idea. So that was really what that made that slightly different, I think. And also it had a lot of folk influence on it, because we all come from that originally, But Birmingham especially is a very, very mixed bag of music, because all the factories there, all people from all over the world, the British Commonwealth, would come, to England to get work. And all that music influenced us. So a lot of folk music came out of England, even bluegrass and all that stuff is all influenced by British or European folk music. Let's face it, that's what it is. And we were very much into that. So, that album showed a little bit more of that side of us, I think.
So, of the albums that you folks released after that, I know that you say that each album was kind of different. It changed the band or featured a different aspect of the band. Actually, overall, do you have a favorite album, or do you have any favorite memories of going on tour with any of those albums?
Well, again, it would be whatever we were doing at the time. When you go on tour, you're automatically, promoting that specific time of your life, of that album, those recordings. Of course you are, because that's where you are. But each time we would go out, except for the 76 tour, of course, was a mixture of all the albums. That was the kind of the world, because that's when we were out there for like 9 months straight, you know. And we should have gone to Japan, but we didn't in the end. But it was like a mixture of everything, whereas all the other tours were basically, you know, if it was a London Town album, then that's what we would be going out there and concentrating on those songs. So it was all about that, really. And it was down to the amount of live work you were doing. That depending on how good the band got, you see. You can only get so good being in the studio. You've got to play live, like I said before. And once you start playing live, the songs take on a new life, you know. In fact, you only do songs that really work live. A lot of songs don't really work that well. I mean, they all do, but they, you know, when you want to put a set together, they have to be different tempos, different key changes, and all that stuff. So, in different styles, in order to keep the audience there. So that's really all you do. It's the same as putting a set together when you first start. You know, you pick songs that fit together, really.
Well, I do want to say your last album, Back to the Egg, I know that wasn't really well critically received. However, I absolutely love that album. My friends and I all listened to that every day back in high school. It was a favorite of ours. I mean, what was that like recording that album? Because I think it's very diverse. I think that it features so many great songs. However, it wasn't really well critically received. I mean, why do you think that is? And what are your own thoughts on that album?
If you look at it from the point of view of it being a new band again, see, this is what you got to think about. That was a new lineup. And although we toured a little bit, we hadn't really done enough live work. So Lawrence, for example, I mean, both of those guys I found. You know, Lawrence was working the same studio I was working in. I met him. He was saying, if you need a guitar player, actually played guitar on Go Now when I did a TV show, David Essex show. He was the band, you know, like the band guitar player, and that's how I met him originally. So Steve Holly was a neighbour of mine. And he came around one day and met Paul and Linda at my house in the country, and they met him there. So when we decided we want to put another band together, instead of like do auditions, he said, why don't we do you know anybody? I said, well, you met Steve, and then there's this Lawrence. So that became a very quickly put together band lineup. So when we went in the studio, you know, already knew Steve quite well. Paul knew him a little bit. It was very easy. And Lawrence was just a great guitar player who could just play anything. So he was very versatile. So it kind of worked from that point of view, especially in the studio. Like I say, we hadn't really worked live that much. So that album, again, was a new approach. There were good songs. But I think the audience was probably thinking, oh, here we go. New band again, you know, it's not as polished or doesn't have the same feel as all the other albums. And people are always a bit skeptical with change. You know, they don't accept change just like that. But if you say you and all your pals were like into it, that's a great indication of like the fact that you saw what we were trying to do, you know, and appreciated it. That makes us feel good because we don't always get that feedback, you see, at the time. We just do what we do and hope it's going to go all right, you know, but not that we care that much. We just do what we do.
It's funny, you know, from my perspective, hearing that it wasn't, you know, that well received, just because, again, my friends and I love that album. We listen to it all the time, and they're just such classic songs on there. I mean, Arrow Through Me is a great song. Getting Closer is a great song. And one of my favorites is Old Siam Sir. I don't know if maybe you could speak to that song specifically, because it's very unique and different. Do you know maybe what inspired that song?
Shall we just say, I don't know, because I didn't write it, but I can only say that Paul was, you know, read a lot of books. It's like Spirits of Ancient Egypt. He was reading a book about that. I don't know what inspired him to do that song. All I know is that the feel of it, you know, the feel comes from the lyric, if you like, or what inspired him to write it. And we all jump in on that feel. And it's all to do with the feel. It's all to do with the style that, you know, I might think, oh, you know, what kind of guitar part would I put to something like that? And that's what I would do, you see. And then everybody puts their bit in, and it becomes another sound. But it's based on generally the lyric or the style of song that it's written about, or it's usually to do with. See, we travel a lot, right? We travel a lot. We see a lot. We meet a lot of different people from all different parts of the world, and we try to be. We're influenced by that, and we try to write and copy their style in a way. And that would be the same thing. We would just use that as a sort of springboard, and then just do our own thing to it. But we'd be influenced by the lyric, obviously.
You wrote the song again and again and again, correct?
Yeah.
What was the writing process like for that song?
Well, excuse the pun, but again, it was two songs put together. You'd be the chorus. Well, three sections, and they all joined together. And again, it's like, well, we wouldn't think to do that too much, but that's what we did. And it's three definite parts in that song. It could have just been one of those parts could have been the song, but it was the same approach. And again, I had these three bits, and I suppose Paul might have said to me, well, why don't you join them together? Because he was always a big influence on me as far as the arrangements too. Although I was pretty good at doing arrangements with the Moody Blues and stuff, but Paul's approach was a little bit more commercial in some ways. He had more experience. He was older than me. He was like an older brother, and he sort of guided me into a lot of things I hadn't done before, especially in the studio, because he'd had a lot more experience in the studio than me. Well, anyway, that's really what happened with that song. And well, as I say, it was acoustic guitar, just like a 12-string guitar, and I put it together like three parts, and it was easy, I mean, say, you leave other guys to do their bits, like Lawrence. We needed some guitars, and in the center of it, and we put two guitars, like overdubbed two parts that were like in harmony. Now, a lot of bands had been doing that, but not a lot of them were doing that style of two guitars together. A lot of heavy metal bands do that, where they got two guitar players playing like harmonies, saying. So that was another little idea we threw in there.
Right. Obviously, too, with Rockestra theme, I mean, just the amount of talent that you had performing on that one song. You had David Gilmour, you had Pete Townsend, you had John Paul Jones, so many others. It's amazing that you're able to get that much talent in one place at one time to record one song. So maybe could you speak to that a little bit? What was that process like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we knew all those guys. I mean, like John Bonham was a friend of mine from childhood. Basically, he used to come and watch my band when I was with Bev Bevan. He used to come and watch us at his local youth club. They're all mates in a sense. So it was Paul's idea to try and do, an orchestra of rock musicians. But in my opinion, I think the song was a little bit too simple. It's like you had all that talent and they never really got to play a lot. This is a simple song that worked, but we could have got a lot more. Maybe if we'd done more recording with that lineup, we would have developed it a little bit more. It was just, let's do something simple to get it, done.
Right.
And it was a start. But yeah, there was a lot more potential within that. The musicians that were there. I mean, we could have got a hell of a lot more out of them if we'd taken more time or recorded more with them. I think it was just meant to be a start of something bigger, but we never got around to doing it again.
Well, I imagine there have to be a couple of constraints there, right? I mean, studio time has to be one, and again, the time of everybody involved, but also, I mean, the creative differences probably of the people involved, because something that I read was that Jeff Beck was also supposed to be involved with that. However, he wanted some sort of veto power over the guitar section, so he had to leave and not be part of that.
Well, I don't know about that. I know Pete Townsend wasn't too pleased about the fact it was all filmed without him knowing it.
Really?
Well, we had the cameras hidden because we didn't want them to be,
He didn't know? That's hilarious. He really didn't know that they were there?
Yeah, but we didn't want them intruding on the atmosphere. See what I mean? So you put the cameras behind the wall with holes so the cameras wouldn't be seen. It wasn't meant to deceive anyone. I think everybody else knew that we're going to be filmed. But it's like when you're doing a live show, you don't want some guy like on his knees in front of you with a big camera. It puts you off, you know what I mean? You kind of get used to it. But in them days, we didn't really want that intrusion, so we kept them. And then when Pete Townsend said, "What's going on here?" he started having a go about it. So, why are you filming this? Where's my contract? I don't know. But the fact is, I don't know about the Jeff Beck thing at all. And I know Jeff too. As I say, I thought it was just whoever was available that came on there. It was like the Band on the Run cover. It was whoever was in town, who we would ask to come and play. So I thought that was the situation with that. But again, maybe, if they had a little bit more of an influence individually, we might have come up with something a hell of a lot more intricate and a lot more, musical in some ways. But, that's the way I see it. I just think it kept it simple because it wanted to do it all in one day and it was done and that was it. But again, I still think it could have been a little bit more. I would have loved it if Jeff Beck had come in and taken over the guitar sections and give some ideas. I don't know. It's just the way I am,
Well, something else I heard too was that Keith Moon also was supposed to be on that. However, he died shortly before recording. And then, unfortunately, John Bonham died not that long after. And additionally, John Lennon died that same year too. So I imagine that had to be a really tough year. And was Paul actually the person who told you when John Lennon was assassinated?
I, like everybody else, I heard about it. Obviously, when it happened, from the press, from whatever was going on, and I don't know, radio, whatever, TV. But Paul came into the studio that next day. I didn't think he would. We were at Air Studios at the time. And he came in because he wanted to get out of the house. He wanted to just do something, to take his mind off it a little bit. But in actual fact, we just sat and talked all day. We didn't do any recording. And actually, we looked out the window. We were 5 stories up at Air Studios in London. And we looked down at Oxford Circus, and a big furniture truck went by with Lennon's written on the side of it. And we both looked at each other and went, uh-oh, what's that? Because, it was a sign in a way, weird. And we just talked about John, because you got to remember, I knew John really well too. I drive by Central Park every day, almost, and I still haven't been to his memorial thing there, because I feel weird about it. It's like, he was a friend. And it's like I haven't even been to that place. So it was very strange. It was shocking, but it was me and Paul just sitting there, just talking about a friend, really, rather than who he was, but to the public, you see. And Paul was obviously completely he needed somebody to talk to, I suppose, and I was that person, and vice versa. And when you're dealing with the press, it's another story, but when you're dealing with someone close who knew the same person, it's like a family thing almost. So it was very strange. But it was very sort of, the closure was there, you see. He got it out of his system more. He said to me, I'm never going to, when people argue and they fall out, he says, I'm never going to do that again. And I know what he meant by that, because of all the Beatles stuff that went down, all the fighting over the money and stuff and all that. But I know for one fact that he had kind of got friendly back in with John again before it happened. So that was a good thing. Yeah, so that's that.
So this was right around the time that Wings finally broke up. I know that this was kind of precipitated by Paul's arrest in Japan. But I mean, was that specifically the reason for the breakup, or did you folks just not think that you could do that much together anymore? Just what kind of what was the final discussion that you guys had as far as why the band wasn't going to be playing together anymore?
It wasn't a discussion. It was just kind of, we knew we wouldn't be able to go out on the road for a while because of we'd already done everything, and Japan was like the last part on the tour. And when he got busted there, you can't get visas just like that. I mean, we'd already had those visas revoked 5 years before at the end of the 76 tour. So, it's very difficult. So I thought, well, that's it. We're confined to the studio now for another few years. And I wasn't very happy about it either, because I wanted to do that tour. I always wanted to do Japan and, that stuff. So it was a big disappointment, but I still was hanging around. I still did, 2 albums after that.
Right.
But as far as the band was concerned, like Lawrence and Stevie and the new guys, they started calling him up, I suppose. And I was there one time when Paul was saying, well, I don't know what I'm doing really. I don't know what we're going to do. Don't have any plans. And it drifted apart, really. Whereas, like, me and him, well, I suppose we were closer, and we ended up, getting together again and start working on some new songs, and away we went. So, it was just the fact that we couldn't tour, I think, that caused that breakup.
And again, it seems like you really do value touring. I mean, again, you were still releasing music. You're still touring today. You're going to actually be playing in Old Saybrook, Connecticut on January 10th, which I really look forward to seeing you there. And I also imagine that doing that has to add sort of an extra perspective, like you were speaking about earlier, when you go different places. It helps you record. It helps kind of get you in tune with a different vibe, I suppose. So, I mean, what is it like touring now, and how is it maybe influencing anything that you have recorded, are recording, or might record?
When you're touring, when you're on the road, you should go in the studios, during that time or after that time, as soon as possible, because that's when you're at your peak as far as your energy level, And it's got nothing to do with age. It's nothing to do with it. It's whatever age you are, you're still going to have that same enthusiasm for whatever you're doing. So, I'm going out touring. I've got a great band, and some of them are younger, a lot younger than me. So, I'm getting my influence from those players with this older material. And some of it, of course, is stuff of my own. I mean, some of it, I'm actually doing these 2 albums, so that takes up, about an hour and a half anyway. But I'm doing a few other ones of my sort of wing stuff, my Time to Hide and that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, it's the fact that I'm on the road that I enjoy more than anything, really. Because I grew up being in a band that was on the road all the time. We weren't going to the studio, we weren't doing anything but playing live. That's all we did. That's how we made a living and whatever, and that's what we enjoyed. So without that, I wouldn't be happy at all. And there have been periods of my life when I haven't toured, and it's been miserable for me. Even though I spent like the 80s in the studio, learning a lot of stuff, doing a lot of overdubbing and enjoying writing and stuff like that. It was never as good as when you're out there playing to an audience. So that's really what this is all about. And my band has got to the point now where we've done enough of these kind of shows to actually, get a new management. WEAA is a management and agency involved to kind of, push me out there again, because you need people like that. You need people who are pros, on their particular level, that to help you do it. You want it to be done right, and they take over a hell of a lot of the work. They take the pressure off by doing their job well. So I'm really feeling, like I'm being helped here, which is great. You've got to remember, I've done it on the best levels possible with Paul and everything, and Moodies even. But when you're out there on your own, it's a whole nother ball game, as they say. And And it's been a bit of a struggle for me, but I'm at that point now where I'm really looking forward to, these gigs. So that's really it. I'm going out on the road and enjoying it. And eventually, of course, we will. I actually have done 2 songs with this new band. We've been playing enough we just go in there. We know everybody's capable of doing, and we just let people do what they want to do. And you come out there with a great thing. It's not work. It's not like hard work when you've got a great band. So that's where I'm at with it.
Well, what I also want to ask too is, I imagine that, because I had Martin Barr on the show previously, and he also brought up the influence of touring and how that really helps inform musical artists. And as I mentioned previously, I love the music of Wings, even though I was born in '86 after you folks broke up. Yeah. And just looking back to the music of the '60s and the '70s, it was so creative, it was so intricate, it was so progressive. I think that's really been lost in music, since at least the '90s. So I don't know really why that is, and I've really kind of run that over in my head a lot of times. I don't know if maybe it was the influence of, honestly, the psychedelics and the culture of the period, if it was technology, if it was the musical industry and how that might have changed, or if it might be, like you're saying, touring. I mean, do you think it's more any one of those things, or do you think it's really just the perfect storm of all of those different things together?
You got to realize that what I said before is that the bands came together in those days because, after the war, we were all encouraged to go out there and do whatever we could do to survive. There was never anybody saying, "Oh, don't do that, get a real job." Not really. And so there's a lot of freedom to go out and do that, which I don't know whether you get that these days. Mind you, because the music business has been proven to be, a good way to make a living, then it has encouraged a lot of younger people over the years to get into it more. Well, in a different way. See, we were just left to do it. But in a way, we had the support of other bands. We had that competition you talked about. We had all of that stuff. We had the '60s, which was, again, it was a renaissance, really, for everybody. Fashion. So it wasn't really, it wasn't that hard. You see what I mean? You were part of a movement. And that really was what made it easy for everyone. There were a lot of musicians, a lot of bands, there's a lot of stuff around, but, you were given the help. And everybody, including the record labels, were all starting from the beginning, in a way. Well, over the years, the music business become more of a corporation, really, than it was, in a sense. And now you can buy books on how to look after your finances, what amps to buy. You go on YouTube, you can learn everything about guitar strings, anything. We didn't have that in them days. We just had to kind of busk our way through it. I never even knew how to tune a guitar when I first got one. I always had to make up my own tuning. So it was like, same with we didn't use guitar tuners. I was always being told to tune up. But it was a different approach, that's all I can say. But there's a good thing about it is that everybody went through all these changes. I mean, Mike Pinder, for example, was responsible for, synthesizers. Him and Edu Libari from Roland Corporation invented the synthesizer based on the Mellotron, where Mike Pinder used to work at Mellotrons, before the Moodies. So everybody was doing experimental stuff for years, and then suddenly it turned around that, everybody thought, well, wait a minute, we're not going out on the road and doing this. It's all in the back rooms. We were making our records at homes, And so it was all like that. The full circle is the bands are now going out and playing again. So the more venues opening, it's become more healthy from that point of view, I think. And there's a lot of young bands now who are, obviously very talented musicians are out there. But again, they're trying the hardest to be as different as they can, just like we did. It's the same kind of thing. I see that as being a very good move that's going on at the moment, where you've got the old technology mixed in with the new, and that's very healthy. I like the fact that the tools these days are there. But also, if you go in a studio now, you have all the old amplifiers, all the old guitars, and you have all the new stuff as well. They cater for both. And the fact that vinyl's come back is great. It's just a mixture of everything now, which is kind of healthy, I think. So there's nothing... This is probably one of the best years for music, I would say.
I guess so. I definitely see where there are good new bands. It just seems like maybe folks need to work a little harder to find them nowadays than it used to be. I mean, it doesn't seem like the radio stations certainly aren't putting out new experimental sort of bands. They're really just putting on whoever's popular. And I don't know if you've also heard of this thing called the Millennial Whoop. It's a thing where in a lot of new popular songs, there's actually the same formula in there, and it's in every new popular song essentially. Again, on YouTube you'll see lots of videos about it. So it just seems, I don't know if maybe it's the fact that we're getting so technically savvy, if computers are writing songs now or trying to divine what people are supposed to like, or if it's just the industry not willing to make a bet on something new. But again, it does actually, I mean, again, I know that there are good new bands out there, but it does seem like you have to work harder to find them than you did in the 60s, no?
That's an interesting thought. My take on it, to go back to an example with me, was that Stevie Wonder gave Paul, I was there, he gave him a Lindrum, which is the first sequencer drum machine. And then we all started using it. So it's a tool. It's a new tool. It's like having a new toy. You learn how to use it. You put it out there. And then other people follow the idea, and then they started copying it, So that went in one direction, just like the synthesizers. But as I said, it's come full circle, and everybody can use a bit of that and a bit of... But the main thing that's going on now is that bands are playing live more. So that is the biggest lesson that they didn't have for, I would say, a couple of, decades. There weren't that many, live bands as there is now. This is more like the 60s and 70s to me. Because of that. But
it's very optimistic. It's good to hear.
No, it's true though. Because, as I say, I can look at like Glastonbury Festival or something and say, oh, they're good. They're great. They're different. That's a good songwriting. That's a good song. Whatever. It's the same thing. What it is that most people are like recording at home, and they don't necessarily go out to work like we did. We had to go out to the studios. We had to be constricted to the amount of time we could use. Things cost money. People have got all that stuff at home now, but they're not actually, forced to do stuff as much. It's like self-discipline has to come in there. But whereas we were like, we never had a day off. We were always like pushed to do stuff, by whoever we got involved with. But that doesn't seem to be as much as these days. I don't know why, but it just isn't. And therefore, that support isn't there, I don't think, as it was in the old days, of like people all getting together to try and want to make it. It's kind of a little bit more, everybody's not forced enough to do their best, is what I'm saying. So the thing about playing live is it does force you to do your best, because if that audience don't like it, they're going to let you know. And that's really it. You've got to be forced to do your best. And that is something that is harder, I would say, for younger bands now. But it's getting better, that's all. And I've always been an optimist because I've seen it happen so many times, different generations. And even during the 80s, when I was doing a lot of computer stuff, I was programming all my drum parts, and all my albums I did mostly myself, except when I got Rick Wakeman and the drummer from AC/DC on a couple of albums. But, generally speaking, I was doing what everybody's been doing for the last 20, 30 years as well, where I was like making everything up myself, writing, playing, doing that one-man band thing. well, then you grow out of that, and you think, well, the only real fun I'm going to get is when I play with other people, because that's where you get the real satisfaction of playing, And live again brings that out in you. So I think it's pretty healthy at the moment. Say it does sound a little bit samey, but people are trying to be different again, which is good.
Well, Denny, the last thing I want to ask you about was earlier this year you were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Moody Blues. When did you find out about that, and what was that experience like actually getting inducted?
Justin Hayward said it well on the night. He said, look, we're just English guys. We don't really know a lot about the Hall of Fame. It's an American thing, really, is what it is. And we weren't as, shall we say, we weren't brought up with the Hall of Fame as much. We never really thought of it like that.
It's true. It's a newer invention, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've always thought that like any award is nice, but you don't have to expect it. You don't think you really deserve it half the time. You just think, okay, if they want to give me a Grammy, I'll take it. But it's not to do with it. It's not being too shy. It's just being like, so what, really? Yeah, great. We've done something good. We're getting rewarded for it.
That's funny.
But when you do get inducted, then you feel different. Even Graham Edge said it. He said, look, I was never into this to start with, but now I'm here. I'm really enjoying it. I'm getting off on it, It's that same kind of feeling. And the fact that I was with the rest of the Moodies was even better, because obviously I haven't been in touch with these guys for years. Well, actually, last few years I have, but before that we weren't. And I felt, very, very happy to be in their company, in a sense, because I thought, well, we've all done this together, at different times, and we've all, here we are all together again. It was more like a meeting at, school, get together. But it was really the fact that people were saying the Moodies should have been in years ago. Now I remember seeing Steven Van Zandt's a friend of mine, and Howard Stern, and they were talking about this a few years back, saying, well, why aren't the Moody Blues in there? This and that. So Steve was going, well, the old Moody Blues should definitely be in there. And of course we did. We had Go Now, so that should have got us in there anyway. But they weren't. And so everybody's saying, well, you should be. Whereas we're thinking, well, we don't really care. It doesn't really matter to us whether we're in it or not, We still can go out and play and get audiences and do whatever. So we never thought about it to that point. But as I say, once you do, you go there and you're part of it, then you really feel, it's like a fantastic feeling to be in that room with everybody and hearing their stories, really, So I mean, it's like good to be part of a club in some ways.
From my perspective, I think it's just a matter of time before Wings has to get inducted too. I mean, I know that it's not a certainty, but it just seems kind of silly if it doesn't happen. If it were to happen and you were to get inducted again, what would your thoughts on that be? I mean, how would you feel to be a two-time Rock and Roll Hall of Famer?
Well, look at Eric Clapton. I mean, Eric's an old mate of mine, and I've watched his career, and he's been done, I think, more than anybody, hasn't he, for all of these things. So I don't see Wings as being so much of a band, though. It was more Paul's band in that sense. It was, and he got inducted as an individual, partly to do with his work with Wings. That's how I see it. I don't know whether Wings ever qualifies as a band, because it was many different lineups, you see. So it's a bit strange, that one. But obviously, if I was, I'd be very happy about it, because, hey, it's being recognized for your contribution to something. I mean, everybody really, if you own up about it, it makes you feel good, Everybody's going to feel good about being praised to a certain degree. And that would be fantastic if it happened, but I don't expect it to happen, and it doesn't bother me either way.
So as I mentioned earlier, you are on tour currently, and you're going to be playing in Old Saybrook, Connecticut on January 10th at the Kate. For fans who come out and do see you that night, what can they expect?
Well, like I said, I'm doing the two albums that I'm most associated with. Now, I don't always do this show. It's just I've started to do it because I want to go out there with something that people know. They definitely know the Wings stuff. So Band on the Run being the album that I'm more associated with. I don't do all the singing. I've got my band they all do a song each or so. And then on the Moody Blues stuff, it's the very first album. Now, a lot of Moody Blues fans don't know about that first album. And so I'm going out there just purely because it like represents me as the lead singer of that lineup, you see. And also some of the songs that I wrote with Mike Pinder. So those two albums is definitely, that's the first, most of the show. And then, as I say, I will do, a few other Wings things that I'm known for on albums and stuff. But basically, I'm just trying to get something out there. It's almost like, you get tribute bands going out and doing all this stuff, and they're copying it note for note and all the rest of it. I don't necessarily do it that way. I do those songs, a modern version of those songs, even though most of the parts that were there are still there. I have a different approach, and I don't want to come across as sounding like, Wings or the Moody Blues exactly note for note from the record, because there are other bands that do that. But my approach is just the songs with me as I am now. So I mean, so that's about it really. But again, it's just an experiment, and then probably later on in the year we'll just go out and do, a set that's a mixture of everything rather than just the two albums being the priority.
Well, in any case, I can't wait to see you, and of course it was an honor having you on the show today and spending so much time with you and going through your entire career. Again, I've been a longtime fan. Your music has affected my life, again, since high school. So I appreciate everything that you've done and all the time that you spent with us today. And hopefully we can have you back the next time that you're coming through Connecticut.
Well, it's been very interesting, and thanks for everything. Good questions. Interesting talking to you, Steve. Thank you very much.